Welcome back. Welcome to week 4. This week we're going to look at the Dark Age and the Archaic Age in the history of ancient Greece. We ended last week by talking about the fall of the Mycenaean civilization, the first major civilization on mainland Greece. And so there's this period of the meltdown of the Bronze Age, and this group from outside called the Dorians, who are warlike northern Greeks, enter into the Greek peninsula. They use iron weapons, which helps make them more successful. They take control of mainland Greece and they capture almost all of the Mycenaean cities. The Mycenaeans who could fled to Anatolia. There's that region again, modern-day Turkey. And so you're going to have these two slightly different Greek civilizations that are going to be emerging. We have the Dorians on mainland Greece, and then we have the descendants of the Mycenaeans in Anatolia. And we have the city of Athens, where the Mycenaeans hold out and maintain their independence. And so this is called the Dark Age because it's a period where we don't have a lot of literacy, we don't have a lot of written sources. It's a dark age from the perspective of historians because we don't understand a lot of what's going on during this time. Move on to the next slide and we'll look at the way that people are living. Civilization has become much more rudimentary, it's become much more fragile. People are no longer living in cities as they did under Mycenaean rule, but they're living in rural villages that are called demos. And most people are farmers. Most of them are not producing any surplus that they can use to trade. They're simply farming what they need in terms of grain, sheep, pigs, and cattle in order to feed and sustain themselves. People lived in mud brick houses, and all social organization was based around the family. So a household is an oikos. Several extended households make up an extended family, a genus, and a clan is made up of all those who hold the same legendary ancestor. So we've diverged into a much more basic tribal society. Move on now to the next slide. Most of the villages in this society were independent and isolated from one another. You held citizenship in one of these villages if you owned land. Land allotments were known as klaros. And so you had the citizens who owned the land. The land was worked by agricultural slaves who had very few legal rights, and each village was ruled by a small king called a basileus. And the role of the basileus is as a hereditary ruler who commands the armies and can defend the city from outside attack. Now, this was not, as some people might think, an absolute monarchy. Most people think that any government before 1776 was an absolute monarchy. Definitely not the case here, typically not the case throughout history. So, the kingship was hereditary, passed from father to son. However, the son, before he could take office, had to be approved by the warrior aristocracy. So that's all the citizens who also make up the aristocracy of these villages. They fight. They form the army under the leadership of the king when the village is under attack. And this council of the warrior aristocracy is known as an ecclesia. They're also the men who are eligible to fight, so who are young enough to fight. And so they also ratify, so they ratify whether they approve the new king, and they also ratify any decisions made by the king. Now, if the king is deciding, shall I go to war against the neighboring Greek city or not, they can ratify his decision to go to war or not to go to war, or they can reject it, but they can't say, we want you to go fight another city. So they can't propose any new topics, but they have the role of ratifying and approving the king's decision. Gradually, smaller and smaller groups of these aristocrats came to control greater and greater amounts of land. And as the land becomes more peaceful, as there are fewer invasions, a king is no longer needed. And so the role of the king starts to be replaced by the aristocrats. And so who are these aristocrats? They're warriors, elite warriors, and elite landholders. So they're the wealthiest in society, and they're the wealthiest because they hold the most land, and they are the chief fighters or the best fighters in this society, the ones who are most able to protect the people in this society. Over the years, as the years went on again, the population expanded. And so now you start to have neighboring villages coalescing together. And when you have a lot of villages that coalesce together into a single community, that ends up being called a polis, each with its own government, each with its own laws. And so here you start to have slightly larger populations, populations of maybe a few thousand people. And so it was in this time that most of the famous Greek city-states that we know of today, Athens, Sparta, and Corinth, is during this period when they are being founded. We'll talk a little more about this in the next video.